pioneer brand canola with Optimum Gly, the highest yielding glyphosate-tolerant trait on the market. What's next in canola happens here.
You're listening to The Successors with Paige Warner on RealAgriculture.com.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Successors podcast. I am your host, Paige Warner. Well, it's the middle of September. My apologies, I didn't get an episode out in August, but hey, we're all allowed a little break now and then. But yeah, it's the middle of September. It's hard to believe. Like, I don't know where summer went. The combines are rolling here in Northeast Saskatchewan, and hopefully your harvest is well underway. If you're a cattle farmer, hey, maybe your calves are weaned or that's on the to-do list. Harvest is probably one of my favorite times of the year because I feel like it's just one of those seasons where you're getting everything off the to-do list before the S comes. I don't want to say the word, but we all know what I'm referring to. Your hard work pays off. Your crops coming in to the bins, your calf crop is getting shipped or you're retaining your replacements, and it's nice to see the hard work like actually starting to pay off. So yeah, I wish everyone a safe and healthy and happy harvest. Hopefully the weather cooperates and there is not too many breakdowns out in the field. So I am super excited for this episode, so let's jump right into it. And joining me now is Sarah Strautman of Living Sky Farms from Brantspeth, Saskatchewan. Sarah, how are you?
I'm great, Paige. How are you? Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. I'm excited for our chat today. So I guess to fill in the audience, because everyone's probably like, where's Brantspeth? So I guess like just for context, you're by what? Half an hour from PA?
Yeah, so from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, we're kind of halfway between Prince Albert and Melfort, so north central Saskatchewan. Very rural, very small town.
Yeah. Perfect. So to start, do you want to tell the audience a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, you bet. So really my journey kind of started when we started having kids. My husband and I, our first child ended up with a lot of food sensitivities, and I know many parents unfortunately experience the same sort of situation where you just really start paying attention to your gut instinct and you start looking at food labels and kind of putting commonalities together. What is it that they're reacting to or responding to? And it was kind of through that process that I really realized how many extra things were in the foods that we consume. Baby foods especially, there's just so many additives and preservatives that can cause stomach upset. And so it put me on this whole foods journey of I want to make everything. I want to know exactly what's in everything. So we started with a garden, and from there we've moved out to the farm. Now we were able to buy a 100-year-old homestead. All of the outbuildings and everything was still standing, and so we've added pigs and chickens, and we've got a milk cow that I milk by hand. It's my favorite thing, honestly. Highly recommend. And we've just kind of gone as natural as possible, everything from scratch. And that really kind of played into where Living Sky Farms started, because I grew up on a grain farm, and even though it was all like, we never really had the grain in our kitchen growing up, but my grandmother had a grain mill. And so when we moved out to the homestead, she gave me her grain mill and I just started experimenting. We had the grain. So I started playing around with it, loved it, the flavor, everything. There is nothing like fresh milled flour. And it was a girlfriend of mine that actually was just completely mind blown that I was doing this in my kitchen. And she's like, more people need to have access to this. You start really looking into the nutritional value of whole grains and whole foods. And again, so much of commercial flour, you're actually sifting out so many of the nutrients and the needed enzymes that your body needs to digest. So a lot of the sensitivities and the irritations that people have to gluten or to some of these things are actually, or can be, not in all cases, of course, but can be a response to some of those additives and preservatives that are in flour, and also just the flour completely not having some of those extra pieces that your body needs to digest it. And so it was just going to be super small, something in my kitchen, just with like this mill that my grandma had given me.
Yeah.
But coincidentally, when we were going to launch this business, it was March of 2020. We wanted to launch it on my 30th birthday, and it was only a few days before we were going to launch that the entire world shut down. And we're like, oh, maybe we should hold off. Like the packaging wasn't able to get here. Our labels, like we literally weren't able to get anything that we needed to produce the product besides the grain in the mill. But then there was no flour on the shelves. And it did not make sense to me that here in Saskatchewan, we've got bins full of wheat. Why are we all in a panic about not having flour? And so we literally went to the co-op in small town Saskatchewan, grabbed plastic bags and paper lunch bags, whatever they had available, printed stickers at home, and just started handing out flour to our local community. And it snowballed, completely snowballed. So
That's
it's been
really
such
cool.
a fun journey.
I did not know that. So for context, Sarah and I, well, your kids, I'm the leader in the 4-H club, your kids are in, so we know each other. And yeah, I did not know that story. That's so cool.
Okay. Yeah, it's a little bit long-winded, but so much, it's all part of the process, and it's all played into everything. So it really is kind of,
yeah,
it's fun.
So touching on that then, so you grew up on a grain farm, and it's like they clean seed, correct? Like it's...
Yes. Yeah. So they are a commercial grain farm where they grow a lot of cereals, a little bit of canola. But it's my dad and my brother who are running it now. And my dad is really into a lot of the food grains and looking at different varieties and stuff like that. So it's been really fun to come back to the farm with, the whole foods knowledge and just kind of take a whole new spin on it and looking into all of these different pieces.
Right. So did you take any schooling then for like any of this, or is it just like background knowledge, or how does like...
I like to call myself a lifelong student. So I did go to university. I'm actually a couple courses short of a business degree. We decided to have kids first, and I never went back for those last 3 or 4 classes.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, it's just like always evolving, always learning. I am currently studying for a holistic nutritionist diploma. I've done tons and tons of different, business changes, the market changes, everything changes so quickly. So, yeah, just lots and lots of research mostly.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So when you first started, you were in your kitchen, prepping your grains, making the flour. So where are you now then? Because I know that you've been working on big things.
Yeah. So, actually in the last 8 months, our business has quadrupled. So
Wow.
we started growing a year ago to the point where we had built a new warehouse. I'm hoping to put a storefront in there. We've had to upgrade our mill 3 times now. And so we're still doing it on farm, but we are now looking at expanding that even further. We've got staff, it's definitely grown, and it has been so much fun.
That's awesome. So what does that process look like then for you? Like kind of a quick rundown from start to finish of, say, processing your flour.
Okay. Well, so, honestly, it's very simple. We don't have because our goal is to keep as much of the nutrients as possible in the flour, it is right now we're doing a whole grain flour. I do have the sifting equipment to create an all-purpose flour, but really my intention with this business is whole foods as much as possible. And so the grain goes into the mill, and then from the mill it just goes into the bag. And that is it. There is nothing added. There is nothing taken out. It is just 100% whole. And another thing is we mill to order. So we don't have anything sitting on the shelves unless we're building up for a big market or a big event where we need to have stuff. But even then, everything is milled and you are buying this flour within a week of it being milled. So it is all very, very fresh, and retaining as much nutrients as possible.
Nice. And so you sell the product, but you also because you sell the equipment too, right? So that people can do this in their own kitchens.
Yes, so we have partnered with a company called Como, and they are a company in Austria that manufacture kitchen-sized grain mills. They are beautiful, they are handcrafted, and it's just such a nice aesthetic, but also functional and practical piece of equipment. So that mill from my grandma ended up not working.
Oh no.
It died on me. And so I had to find a new mill. And so while I was doing all of my research, I was looking for things like stone milling. Stone milling being important because you don't get that added heat in your flour. It just helps retain a lot more of the nutrients. Sometimes you can get metal mills that basically hammer grind the flour. That creates a lot of heat and a lot of friction, and you lose a lot of the nutritional value when you mill flour that way versus with a stone. So stone milling was important. Having the adjustability to grind the flour was another thing, so that as I'm playing in my kitchen, I love to do like a coarser grind so that you can get chunks of wheat in your flour and your bread, or you can do like a textured breakfast cereal or something like that, as well as the really, really fine flour for doing things like pastries and stuff at home. And so Como was my go-to after doing all of my research. It was the mill that I really wanted for my kitchen. And so it was just it's been such a fun journey and how things have worked out. We are now the Canadian distributors, so we import from Austria, and then we have a few retailers here across Canada, as well as selling direct to consumers so that other people can have a grain mill in their kitchen. And the reason we promote both milling in your kitchen as well as having the flour is not everybody wants to invest in having that type of equipment in their kitchen, whether it's the time for baking or the financial ability to do so. But that's where the flour comes in. But the reason for home milling is you actually lose a lot of the nutrients. I shouldn't say a lot of the nutrients, but your flour, as soon as you break that kernel of grain, you start the oxidation process, which ends up leading into rancidity. So within the first 48 hours after milling your flour, you've lost almost all of your vitamin E in that specific flour. And so we always recommend once you mill it, like throw it in the freezer.
Yeah.
Try and keep the nutrients there as much as possible. It's why we do everything fresh as well. But for those who really want the maximum nutrition, fresh milled and using it right away after you mill it is when you're going to get the best flavor and the best nutrients.
That's interesting. And I keep saying flour, and I shouldn't just be saying flour. Like, you do a variety of different products. Do you want to touch on that a little bit? Like what the variety is that you do?
For sure. So we have a flaker, and so we do fresh flaked oats. And again, most people don't know this about flaked oats or rolled oats, but a lot of times the stuff you buy in the store is processed. It's already been steamed or pre-cooked, and a lot of those digestive enzymes that I've been talking about are no longer present. And so we do everything raw flaked. It is basically just squished grain. It's raw. It's not processed. There's no heat. There's no nothing. As well, we do pearled barley. And that's been a really fun one because My dad has a variety of barley that is a very high fiber barley. It contains beta-glucans. And beta-glucan is basically just a really high fiber that is recommended for managing cholesterol, diabetes, all that sort of thing. And so we are able to use that with our pearled barley.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so jumping back into Living Sky Farms. So what do you find to be the biggest challenge with your business?
I would say there's a couple of them. One, the biggest challenge as of late has just been the growth. Actually, they both kind of tie into each other, the two hardest things. So when you have incredible growth like this, but you're also wearing the hat as the farmer, the one managing the business, the one, kind of doing a lot of the roles within the business, it gets really hard, especially during busy seasons like harvest. So right now,
Yeah.
it's just, all of the market seasons are the same. You've got spring and fall are your busy market seasons. It's speaking seasons. It's harvest and seeding seasons. All of your busy seasons are very, very busy.
Right.
And so, yeah, definitely wearing all of the hats and trying to navigate where your priorities lie. I'm pretty sure we've all seen, on Facebook or Instagram, there's that, I don't know if it's a meme or a video, but knowing what your big rocks are with your sand and when you pile all those things in there, or as you're juggling all the balls, knowing which ones are glass versus which ones are plastic.
Yeah.
So that when they drop, which ones are going to shatter and which ones are okay to fall for a little while.
Right.
And it really is just like a daily challenge of reassessing what's what.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I feel like, yeah, it would be a lot too. And I mean, you're raising kids on top of it all, right? So I mean,
Yes.
you have school stuff and sports and
yes,
all the things.
Just like on a personal note here, like I did not let my kids sign up for any activities outside of school activities. My son has been begging to play hockey for a couple of years now, and I finally succumbed and I signed him up for hockey this year. But oh my goodness, you guys, like it is so hard between having to be home for a milk cow and trying to commit to all of these things that require you to be away from home. It is definitely a lot.
Yeah. Oh, I believe it. So, since you brought up the milk cow, I have a couple questions.
Yes, absolutely.
So you milk her, and what do you do with the milk? Like, do you separate the cream? Like, can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. It kind of depends how I'm feeling that day, honestly. But yeah, so I strain it and then we put it into the fridge and I usually let it sit for at least 12 hours and the cream naturally separates from the milk. I have been interested in potentially trying a cream separator. I think it would be neat. And I think it might save some time. But I love the simplicity of just getting like a small ladle and just scraping the cream off the top of the jar. There is nothing more satisfying than getting that very thick cream on the very top. It's literally like a pudding texture. And you just get a big dollop of that and you put it in your coffee. And honestly, please come for coffee sometime.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And she had twins, didn't she?
Yes, she had twin heifer calves this year, and it's so funny. I'm new to cows and animals, so we are, 3 years in to having cattle? And so the AI process, and I didn't realize you could get sexed semen so that you can direct, intentionally have a girl. And I mean, it's still a 50% chance, but our first experience with sexed semen, we ended up with a little bull calf, which was so disappointing, but he was the cutest thing. We named him Burt Reynolds and
nice.
Oh, he was so funny. But to come back from that with twin heifer calves was just, wonderful.
Yeah.
So exciting.
So now your milk production's gonna
I know.
double?
Yeah, so when we first got the milk cow, we just, you don't really realize how much milk you're going to get from a milk cow. And so we were a little bit overwhelmed initially. And I convinced my husband that's where the pigs came from. So you end up with a surplus of milk. And if you have extra, you give it to the pigs. But now we got to the point where I'm like, no, if I'm going to be doing all these things, we need a second milk cow so that we can also feed the pigs as well as do all the things I want, which is why we tried the sex semen so that we could have a second one. So now I'm like, well, maybe we should keep all three of them. But I also love milking by hand. So the idea of milking 3 cows by hand twice a day causes me a little bit of stress also. So
yeah, I feel like that would be a lot.
It could be, yes.
So if you were to open a storefront in your warehouse, would you be able to sell cream off the milk, or would you have to go through processes like to
I
get
would
it
love
approved?
to. I would love to. I think that would be so cool. But unfortunately, in Canada, we are so limited to what we can do. So, just to step back a little bit, one of the sensitivities that my oldest, or my first child ended up having was dairy. And we ended up getting like an EpiPen and everything for her. Her dairy allergy was quite severe. However, throughout the process, we have discovered she doesn't react at all to raw milk. So, similar to the grain, a lot of those enzymes that your body needs to digest it just aren't present after they go through the processing that's required. Please don't take this as medical advice or anything like that. This is just my personal experience and what I have found, trial and error. But like, I'm drawing a blank at what it's called when you pasteurize. That's the word. When you pasteurize the milk, it's required in Canada that any dairy that's sold is pasteurized, especially for human consumption. So, unfortunately, and the penalty for things is like jail time, serious fines. So that's probably not something, as much as I would love to, that's definitely not something that I'm going to entertain.
Yeah, so you can do it for yourself, but yeah, you can't sell it then.
No, it has to be consumed by my family on my farm. So
Gotcha. Interesting. So with Living Sky Farms, so you have an online store and you ship orders.
Yes. Yes.
So where have you like all shipped to?
Oh, all over Canada. We have shipped to every province, every territory.
Cool.
And shipping in Canada can be such a situation. It's very expensive. And when you're shipping heavy items like grain, it gets really expensive really quickly. And I guess that would be another challenge, even though to circle back, it's another challenge of my business for sure. Because the more weight, the more it costs. But the cost of the grain, the value of the grain is so much less than, like, it's not something that you can easily bury some of those costs to help share the costs with customers. So like a 5-pound bag of grain, the cost is like $10, but minimum parcel shipment cost is $25 in Canada. So there's like, I can't bury $25 in a $10 bag of grain. There's just no possible way to do that. So that's definitely been the biggest challenge for logistics. But we do ship Canada wide, and with our new warehouse and commercial kitchen and what we're setting up in the farm currently, we are going to get CFIA licensing as well with it so that we can ship into the US as well.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah,
that's
very
super
exciting. I have no idea how long it's going to take to get that, but I'm really excited for it.
It's just like, however long it takes, it's just like, that just builds the excitement and the anticipation for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what would be your favorite grain to process or mill?
This is a really interesting question. And I had to really think about it because after I've been milling grain in my kitchen now for, I think it's been almost 12 years, honestly. And so it's just kind of like, okay, throw it in the mill. Like I'm not really paying attention to what I'm doing, but I would say my favorite to mill is probably spelt. the smell of spelt is one of my favorite things. It reminds me of like I don't know. I love fall as a season, like autumn harvest. So like that cinnamon nutmeg, that kind of a spicy,
Oh,
nutty.
okay.
And I find spelt almost smells like that when you mill it. It just almost has like this sweet, nutty aroma, and I absolutely love it. And it's very easy to mill because it acts like it is a hard grain, meaning it just grinds really, really nice. But then it soft grains, so it feels really, really soft when you mill it. Sometimes the hard grains can almost feel like a sand when you feel it, like a texture. It's gritty.
Right.
But spelt feels like a soft grain. That's my favorite.
So, which would be your least favorite then, if you had to pick one?
Oh, honestly, oats. Oat
Oh,
flour
really?
is, yeah. So something that I found out along in this journey is oats are almost considered an oil seed when you're milling with stones. So if you're going to be exclusively milling oat flour, I would almost recommend you get a metal grinder rather than milling with stones, because it has a higher oil content and a higher moisture content. And so it almost, if you're not careful, if you're not watching your stones, it's very easy to gum them up and they get really like the residue on the stone, and then it doesn't grind. And if you don't clean it out right away, it just makes such a mess.
Hmm.
So you really have to pay attention. Like I have to open my mill up to almost a coarse grind, and I put the oats in, and then I turn the hopper down to finer until I can get it a good texture.
Oh, okay.
But it's still flowing, because if I leave my stones as tight as they'll go to get a fine mill or a fine grind, the oat flour actually won't even come out.
Hmm. That's
So
interesting.
yeah, in fact.
Fun fact. Yeah. So, going back to, I feel like I'm jumping all over the place, but
That's okay.
and I'm hoping I don't lose power because it's raining. But going back to when you said like the food and all the ingredients, like hidden ingredients, so to say, what do you think is the biggest misconception like in the food industry today?
Oh,
Like in
that's a
relation
really good
to,
question. Yeah, I would say a lot of people, like specific to grains and Living Sky Farms, I would say that wheat in general has gotten such a bad rap. Um, with so many wheat belly and gluten sensitivities, and just like there's so much in the media about that. But a lot of the symptoms that people have for gluten sensitivities or are actually very similar to having either a lack of nutrients or a reaction to some of the additives that are in commercial store-bought flour. And so I would say that probably the biggest misconception with food is probably just understanding what healthy food is. I don't know the logistics of like what nutrients it is, but when flour first started being milled in the 1920s, the white flour was given to the kings, the flaky cakes, pastries, and it was the slaves or the peasants or the non-elite that would get the siftings, the extras. They would sift it out, give the king whatever was with the white flour, and then they would get the leftovers. But and so white flour became seen as this elite thing. And as that progressed, more and more people wanted it, and then it became common law. And when that became common and everybody was able to have access to white flour, they ended up seeing a lot of diseases, and I can't remember what the name of those diseases are right now, but there were a couple of diseases that were very specific because a lot of the nutrients had been taken out of the flour by losing the germ and the bran. And so then it became requirement that flour be have added vitamins put back in it. And so it was synthetic vitamins that were then mandatory to be added back to flour to eliminate those diseases. However, the symptoms of those diseases show up very similar. They are very similar to those with gluten sensitivities.
So when I was picking up my flour the other day, we talked a little bit about the black barley
Yes.
that's on the corner there.
Yes.
Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah, so it's been so fun to have that growing like right on the road to our house, because every single person that comes, whether it's to pick up an order or just to visit, is asking, what is this? And I don't know if you took a picture, but you should
I did.
try and show it here, because that would be so cool. It looks like barley, but it is actually black. And so looking out in the field, like it has that gray, ashy black tinge to it, and as it's kind of matured here with harvest now, it's gotten more and more dark, and it just looks really cool. And so this is a new market. The variety of barley isn't even named yet. It's just numbered. This is, again, my dad is very much into some of these new varieties. They're very fun. But it's primarily, while it will have a little bit more beta carotene, which is just the coloring. So it would be the nutritional difference between like a purple string bean versus a green string beans. Just that color is different. Phytonutrients is a little bit different. But it looks really cool. So to cook it whole or throw it in a stir fry, or into a salad or something like that, like it just looks really, really neat. And so that's something that I'm really looking forward to. We will be offering it with Living Sky Farms as well.
Nice. That's super exciting.
But we're working on another variety similar to our pearled barley that has the beta glucan, and we will need to pearl that. And the reason that we need to pearl those is because it is a proprietary variety. We are the only ones who grow it. We have to do something to it so that it cannot be sprouted, so that we can keep tabs on it.
Yeah.
It's kind of one of those things that
so
we
it depends
need to
on
protect.
and then it depends on the variety that you have, if it has to be or not.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't know who owns this variety specifically as to whether or not it has to be processed before we can sell it. But even just pearling basically just removes the tips. Like a grain, it's kind of shaped like this. And so when you pearl it, you just make it look like this so that you're taking off the tips. But those tips is where the germ is, which is where the sprout would come from. So you're just eliminating a little bit. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's super interesting. But we are unfortunately running out of time. As much as I want to just keep going on this. But thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule for this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, this was so much fun. Thank you very much for having me here. And as always, I love chatting with you. So
yeah,
we'll have to do it again.
And thanks to everyone for tuning in to this episode of the Successors podcast. If you have any questions, suggestions, guest or topic, let me know. Send me an email at phomquist@realagriculture.com. You can find me also on Twitter at Paige Holmquist. Happy harvest, everyone.